The morning Daniel Mercer realized something was wrong, he was sitting in his parked car outside the grocery store and couldn't bring himself to get out. It wasn't pain that stopped him. It wasn't illness in the dramatic sense people usually imagine. It was something quieter. He just felt drained, as if his body had decided without asking him that today was not a day for effort. At 64, Daniel had always considered himself reasonably healthy. He was a retired mechanic from Pennsylvania, the kind of man who fixed things with his hands and rarely complained about discomfort. Tiredness was something you slept off, not something you studied. But this was different. Over the past few months, the tiredness had stopped being temporary. It had become a companion. Some mornings he woke up already exhausted. Some afternoons he had to sit down after simple tasks like unloading groceries. Even reading the newspaper felt like effort some days. And worst of all, he couldn't explain it. That was what bothered him most, because men like Daniel were used to causes. Something breaks, you find the reason and fix it. But his body wasn't giving him anything obvious to fix. At first, his wife Linda thought it was stress. "You've been slowing down since retirement," she said gently. "Maybe you just need more rest." So he rested more. Nothing changed. Then she suggested exercise. So he tried walking around the block every morning. He came back more tired than when he started. Then came supplements from the pharmacy, energy vitamins, multivitamins, B-complex tablets. Nothing made a difference. That's when Daniel started quietly worrying, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that stayed in the back of his mind all day. Something is not right. One evening, Linda handed him her tablet. "I found someone explaining this kind of fatigue," she said. "Dr. Janine. She talks about how chronic fatigue can sometimes be linked to iron deficiency. But not just one cause, several subtle ones people overlook." Daniel sighed. He wasn't much for online health talk, but he trusted Linda. So he watched. Dr. Janine's voice was calm and direct, not dramatic. She explained that iron deficiency is one of the most overlooked causes of chronic fatigue, especially in older adults, and that many people focus only on supplements without understanding why iron levels may be dropping in the first place. Daniel leaned forward slightly, because that part mattered. Not the symptom. The cause behind the cause. She mentioned that there are often hidden contributors people miss: poor absorption in the gut, low stomach acid, chronic inflammation, and unnoticed dietary gaps that slowly build over time. Daniel paused the video for a moment. That idea stayed with him. Slow build, because that was exactly how his fatigue had felt. Not sudden, not dramatic, just gradual erosion of energy. The next morning, he did something different. Instead of ignoring it, he paid attention. Not to panic, but to observe. He noticed how tired he felt even after a full night's sleep. He noticed how his energy dipped sharply after meals. He noticed how long recovery took after even mild activity, and for the first time, he stopped blaming age as the only explanation. Age might be part of it, but maybe not the whole story. That shift alone changed how he approached the problem. Instead of pushing harder, he slowed down and started tracking patterns. Linda noticed the change too. "You're thinking about it differently now," she said. Daniel nodded. "I used to think fatigue was just general. Now I think there's a reason behind it." That became his focus. Understanding instead of guessing. A few days later, he returned to Dr. Janine's explanation and paid closer attention. One of the key ideas stood out. Iron deficiency isn't always about what you eat. It can also be about how your body processes it. That opened a new door in his thinking, because Daniel had assumed that eating decent food meant his body was automatically using it properly. But what if it wasn't? That question led him to reflect on his long history of digestive discomfort. Occasional bloating, occasional irregularity, nothing severe enough to treat seriously, but always present in the background. Could those small things be connected? For the first time, he wasn't looking for a single answer. He was looking for a pattern, and patterns were starting to form. Over the next week, he made small adjustments, not extreme changes, not sudden fixes. He paid more attention to meals that left him feeling sluggish. He noticed which foods gave him slightly more stable energy. He increased hydration. He reduced processed snacks without making it a strict diet. And most importantly, he stopped dismissing his fatigue as something he had to simply accept. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch, he realized something surprising. He had made it through most of the day without needing to lie down. It wasn't perfect energy, but it was more consistent. That alone felt meaningful. A few days later, Linda joined him outside. "You seem a bit more like yourself," she said. Daniel thought about it. "I think I stopped fighting my body," he replied, and started listening to it instead. That idea stayed with him longer than he expected, because it wasn't just about iron, it was about awareness. Later that evening, he watched more of Dr. Janine's content, and one line stood out clearly. When the body is low in iron, it often isn't asking for more effort. It's asking for better understanding of why the deficiency exists. Daniel leaned back in his chair. That changed everything. Because it meant the solution wasn't just add more energy, it was find what's draining it. And that reframed his entire experience. He wasn't broken. He was out of balance, and balance could be studied. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued observing himself carefully. He didn't rush. He didn't assume overnight change. But slowly, small improvements appeared. Less afternoon exhaustion, better tolerance for activity, more stable mornings, not perfect, but noticeably different from before. One morning he went for a short walk farther than he had in months. When he returned, he didn't collapse into a chair immediately. He stood in the kitchen for a moment instead, breathing normally, present, and that small moment surprised him more than anything else. Because it showed him something important. His energy wasn't gone, it was just buried under something he had not fully understood yet. That evening, as the sun set, Daniel sat beside Linda in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, peaceful silence. And he finally said something he hadn't said in a long time. "I think I might be getting better." Linda smiled. "Not might," she said softly. "You are just learning your body again." And for the first time, Daniel believed that might be true, not because everything was solved, but because he was finally paying attention to the right things. Not just fatigue, but its causes. And that changed everything. Thumbnail line: Hidden iron fatigue causes. Daniel didn't realize how quickly small changes could turn into patterns until the third week. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden before and after moment. Instead, it was more like his body stopped feeling like a constant uphill climb. One morning he woke up and noticed something unusual. He didn't immediately dread getting out of bed. That alone made him pause. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time he had woken up without that heavy, dragging sensation in his limbs. It used to feel like his body was made of weighted cloth. Now, it just felt like a normal body again. Not energetic, not supercharged, just workable. Downstairs, Linda was already in the kitchen. "You're up earlier today?" she said, glancing over. Daniel poured himself a glass of water. "I didn't feel like I needed to fight myself to get out of bed." Linda smiled slightly. "That sounds like progress." He nodded, but he didn't fully trust it yet. Because he had learned something over the past months, good days could still be followed by bad ones, and that uncertainty still lingered in the back of his mind. But he kept going. The approach now wasn't obsession, it was awareness. He paid attention to how his energy behaved throughout the day. Morning stability, midday dips, afternoon fatigue, but less intense than before. And importantly, recovery felt slightly faster after rest. These were subtle signs, but they were consistent enough that he couldn't ignore them anymore. One afternoon, he sat with Linda on the porch. The sun was warm, but not harsh. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "Maybe I wasn't just low on energy. Maybe my body wasn't using what it had properly." Linda nodded. "That's what that doctor video mentioned, right?" "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Dr. Janine said iron issues aren't always just about intake. Sometimes it's absorption. Sometimes it's hidden inflammation. Sometimes it's things you don't notice for years." Linda looked thoughtful. "That actually makes sense. You always had that stomach sensitivity thing." Daniel chuckled softly. "I never thought that mattered." But now he did, because he was beginning to understand a bigger picture. The fatigue hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building quietly for years. A slow imbalance, not a sudden failure. That realization changed how he saw his own body. It wasn't breaking, it was communicating. Later that week, Daniel made another small shift. He stopped treating rest as the only solution. Instead, he balanced rest with gentle activity, short walks after meals, light movement in the morning, sitting less, even when he felt okay enough to stay still for hours. At first, it felt counterintuitive. His old instinct was conserve energy, but now he was learning something different. The body sometimes recovers through movement, not just rest. One afternoon, while walking around the block, he noticed something strange. He wasn't counting steps. He wasn't monitoring fatigue. He was just walking. And halfway through, he realized he still felt stable, not tired in the usual overwhelming way, just naturally fatigued in a normal human way. That distinction mattered more than he expected, because before fatigue had felt like a wall, now it felt like a signal. Manageable. Back home, Linda noticed the shift again. "You didn't sit down immediately after your walk," she said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I didn't feel like I had to recover from it." She raised her eyebrows. "That's new." "Yeah," he said. "It feels like my body is cooperating again instead of resisting everything." That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room thinking. He wasn't convinced he had fixed anything, but he also couldn't deny the change. And more importantly, he realized something deeper. He had stopped fearing his fatigue and started understanding it. That shift alone reduced its weight, because fear makes everything heavier than it actually is. A few days later, he returned to Dr. Janine's video again, replaying parts he had already seen. One line stood out even more this time. Chronic fatigue is often not a single problem, it's a collection of small imbalances the body has been compensating for over time. Daniel exhaled slowly. That explained everything better than anything else he had heard. Not a single failure, a collection, which meant recovery also wouldn't come from a single solution. It would come from rebuilding small parts at a time. And that was exactly what he was starting to do. Gradually, he refined his routine even more. He paid attention to meals that left him sluggish and adjusted them slightly. He improved hydration without overthinking it. He gave his body consistent sleep instead of irregular rest patterns. Nothing extreme, just consistency. And slowly, his baseline changed, not dramatically, but noticeably. One morning, he carried groceries from the car without needing to pause halfway through. He stopped at the kitchen counter afterward and realized something simple. He wasn't exhausted, just mildly tired, like any normal person would be. And that realization hit him quietly, because normal tired now felt like progress. Later that evening, Linda came over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've been different lately," she said. Daniel looked at her. "Different how?" "In a good way," she replied. "Less drained, more present." He thought about that for a moment. "I think I stopped thinking of myself as someone who's running out of energy all the time," he said. Linda nodded. "And started thinking of yourself as someone who's rebuilding it." That word stayed with him. Rebuilding. Not repairing. Not fixing something broken. Rebuilding something that had slowly weakened over time. And that changed everything about how he moved forward. Because rebuilding requires patience, not panic. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he had the right mindset to continue. Not rushed, not desperate, just steady. And that steadiness was becoming his new strength. Thumbnail line: fix chronic fatigue naturally. The change became undeniable on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Daniel didn't plan anything special that day. In fact, he had expected it to be like most others, slow, careful, measured. The kind of day where he conserved energy more than he used it. But something was different when he woke up. Not dramatic energy, not sudden strength, just a steady sense that his body wasn't resisting him anymore. He stood in the kitchen and realized he had already been awake for nearly 20 minutes without thinking about how tired he was. That used to be the first thought of every morning. Not anymore. Linda noticed it too as she walked in. "You didn't sit down right away?" she said with a small smile. Daniel shrugged lightly. "I didn't feel like I needed to." That sentence carried more weight than it should have, because for months, even simple standing had felt like a task that required planning. Now it was just normal. After breakfast, he made a decision without overthinking it. "I'm going to take a longer walk today," he said. Linda looked at him for a second. "Longer? How long?" "Not far," he clarified. Just farther than I have been going. She nodded slowly. Okay. But don't push too hard. I won't, he replied. And for the first time, he meant it without hesitation. The air outside was cool, the neighborhood quiet in that late morning way where everything feels unhurried. Daniel started walking. At first, he did what he used to do. He monitored himself. How does my body feel? Am I getting tired? Should I turn back early? But something interesting happened halfway through the walk. The monitoring stopped, not because he forced it to stop, but because it no longer felt necessary. His steps were steady, his breathing was natural, his energy wasn't spiking or crashing, it was simply present, and that realization made him pause mentally even as he kept walking. This is what normal feels like, he thought. Not perfect, not endless energy, just sustainable movement. When he returned home, he wasn't exhausted. That alone felt almost strange. Linda was in the kitchen again. How was it? She asked. Daniel took off his jacket slowly. Different. She raised an eyebrow. Good different or bad different? Good, he said after a pause. I didn't feel like I was borrowing energy I didn't have. Linda smiled softly. That sounds like your system is balancing out. Daniel nodded, but his mind was already connecting something deeper. Balance. That word kept returning because what he had learned over the past weeks wasn't just about iron deficiency. It was about how easily imbalance can build silently and how slowly it takes to reverse. Later that day, he sat on the porch and thought back through everything. The exhaustion that had crept in over months, the frustration of trying random supplements, the confusion when nothing seemed to work, and then the shift when he stopped chasing quick fixes and started observing patterns instead. Dr. Janine's explanation came back to him again. Iron deficiency isn't just about iron, it's about why the body isn't using it properly. That idea had changed everything because it removed the blame from a single missing element and placed attention on the system as a whole. Daniel looked at his hands. He used to think fatigue meant something was wrong in a simple way. Now he understood it was more layered. Absorption, inflammation, lifestyle patterns, long-term stress on the body, nothing isolated, everything connected, and that understanding made him calmer than any supplement ever had. A few days later, Linda suggested they visit their daughter in the next town. Normally, Daniel would hesitate. Long drives used to drain him, but this time, he didn't immediately say no. We can go, he said. Just take it slow. During the drive, something surprising happened. He didn't constantly worry about needing to rest afterward. He didn't mentally calculate how much energy he was spending. He just rode in the car, talking occasionally, watching the scenery pass. And when they arrived, he realized something important. He wasn't depleted, not even close. At dinner that night with family, his daughter noticed. You seem more like yourself again, she said. Daniel smiled slightly. I think I stopped treating my fatigue like a fixed identity. She tilted her head. What does that mean? It means I stopped saying I am exhausted all the time, he explained, and started saying my body has been struggling with something I'm finally learning to understand. There was a brief silence. Then she nodded. That sounds healthier. Daniel thought so too, because identity had been part of the problem. When fatigue becomes who you are, it feels permanent. But when it becomes something you experience, it becomes manageable. That shift changed everything. Later that night, back at home, Daniel sat quietly with Linda. The house was calm, no urgency, no exhaustion pulling him down, just stillness. I don't think I realized how much fear was attached to my tiredness, he said. Linda looked at him. Fear makes everything heavier. He nodded. Now it feels lighter, even when I'm tired. That was the most important difference, not the elimination of fatigue, but the removal of fear around it. Because fear had been amplifying everything. Every low-energy moment felt like failure. Every slow morning felt like decline. Every tired afternoon felt like something worsening. But now, it was just energy variation, human, normal, manageable. As the weeks continued, Daniel kept his new rhythm. Not perfect discipline, not strict rules, just awareness. Rest when needed, move gently when possible, eat with more attention, observe without panic, and slowly his life expanded again. Short trips became easier. Daily tasks felt less draining, and most importantly, he stopped living in anticipation of exhaustion. One morning, while fixing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen, he paused and realized something simple. He had been working for nearly 10 minutes without thinking about stopping. No fear, no resistance, just activity. He stepped back and looked at the cabinet, then at his hands, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't think about what he had lost. He thought about what was returning, not all at once, not completely, but steadily. And that was enough. That evening he sat beside Linda as the sun set through the window. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think my energy was gone." Linda leaned back in her chair. "And now?" Daniel looked outside. "Now I think it was just buried under things I didn't understand yet," she smiled. "And you're uncovering it." He nodded. Not cured, not finished, but no longer stuck. And for Daniel Mercer, that was the beginning of a different life, not defined by fatigue, but shaped by understanding. Thumbnail line: Beat chronic fatigue fast.